half Viking, half god, sorta dead. You're listening to Ranking Rick Riordan, a podcast where we rank every book in the Percy Jackson mythological universe, also known as the Riordanverse. I'm Dan.
I'm Olga.
And I'm Clara, and today we're discussing Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard, the Sword of Summer.
This episode is brought to you by Blitz's Best, the best place to buy Blitz's fabulously fortified fashion. Don't get caught dead wearing last year's trends. Save your life and your style with Blitz's Best.
Good one.
I would shop there. I can't afford Newberry Street, but let's do it.
Good enough for Odin, good enough for me.
Exactly.
Yeah, actually, so if people don't know, we are located in the greater Boston area, so that I'm sure will, be a major part of this discussion.
Yeah.
I think that is the major part of this discussion. I think that's what we might all have the strongest feelings about so far.
All right, so housekeeping real quick. I just wanted to say in case you're wondering, obviously we stopped doing video for a while. We will do video when we are able to be in person again. Obviously with Omicron, everything got kind of messy, to say the least. But once we feel safe, all of us being together again, that's when we'll bring back actual video. All right, Sword of Summer. General thoughts. Oh, actually, one other thing I want to say. We all are reading this for the very first time. If you're not a longtime listener or whatever, we've all only read Magnus Chase Sword of Summer once. I have started Hammer of Thor, but I'm only like a third of the way through. And I don't think either of you have really started Hammer of Thor, right?
Yeah, not really.
No.
Okay.
But the point is that we usually, it was either like Dan and Clara had finished most of the books, and then Dan had read like ahead of us and was rereading, and now it's really just like fresh eyes for all of us. So that's exciting.
So since you're talking, why don't you start? General thoughts.
All right. I thought this book was fun.
Mm-hmm.
It was, while I was reading, I was like, this is a fun romp. I can picture where things are taking place, kind of like we're saying, like this is our backyard. Sure, I can picture making lots of left turns around the Boston Common and et cetera, et cetera. So, that's nice, as a home thing. Now let's get to the book itself. Really. Listen, it's the first episode. It's the first episode. It's the pilot. It has some kinks to work out. Certain things don't necessarily make the most sense to me character wise. I don't know. It just needed a little bit more shine and polish.
I think it's a very solid foundation, and I hope they build upon it well. Whether, obviously, we'll get into the rankings and stuff, whether it's better or worse than Red Pyramid, I think is up for debate, but I think it's just very similar in a lot of ways to Red Pyramid, where there's a lot of explaining that needs to be done in this book. There's a lot of building up of a lot of different mythology and characters. And, as we know from, Throne of Fire, once he can kind of hit the ground running, that usually helps quite a bit. I overall did enjoy this book. I think the cast of characters are quite enjoyable. I think that it's charming. I think he has a lot of interesting ideas with the homelessness stuff and with Magnus actually dying at the beginning and all that. I think there's a lot of cool stuff here, but I think there's a lot of sameness here. And that, to me, was my biggest problem. And it's definitely something that maybe we might have more than the average reader now that we're on our, 18th book? Something like that. It definitely felt like, okay, here's Percy with a twist. Here's Annabeth with a twist. Here's Bess with a twist. And, and here's Camp Half-Blood with a twist. It feels like we've done this before because we have. And I think that unlike with Kane Chronicles, where magic was so different, Norse stuff isn't necessarily different enough from the Greek and Roman to make it feel like a totally fresh take. But I'm talking a lot, so Clara, go.
Yeah, I think so. I was also definitely comparing it to Kane Chronicles, which I think makes the most sense to do because he has to do the most in the shortest number of books.
Yep.
Kane Chronicles, I just immediately cared more about Sadie and Carter I think. Or maybe not immediately, but there was like there was something a lot more tender about those books. There was a lot. I don't know. I didn't have the same emotional connection in Magnus Chase. I wonder though whether that is because I was just coming off of the Trials of Apollo and not coming off of Heroes of Olympus, because Heroes of Olympus is awesome, but Trials of Apollo was so gut-wrenching by the end that this felt it really felt like a return to Lightning Thief. It felt almost more like Percy Jackson, like the original, than it does like either Trials of Apollo or of Olympus.
I would put it in the Heroes of Olympus category. I mean, for one thing, and we'll get into this a lot, I think, incredibly violent. The most violent book he's ever written, I would argue.
So violent.
It is definitely violent. I guess I just like Trials of Apollo was so dark there by the end that this just I think it is a sort of comparison thing where like compared to that a lot of books would feel.
I will say I regret in retrospect not doing Apollo last.
Same.
I think that it was hard not to be harsh on Magnus coming off of Apollo, who I think is his best protagonist, and is his best protagonist because he's flawed and has a big journey to go on, whereas this character of Magnus is, again, just kind of Percy-ish. You know, he has the same sort of humor, and he's a good dude who was good, and just wants to save his mama, which is, you know, again, very Lightning Thief. Obviously, I mean, the humor is nowhere near the kind of childishness. The writing in the humor is not Lightning Thief.
No.
But
it really, but we're back. It does feel like if you zone out a little bit, I'm like, I'm reading Percy again. I really, I don't really feel like Magnus has a distinct voice from Percy. He has a distinct, like, what happened to him and what how he like is engaging with the world. Well, not even that's true. I think Magnus responds the same way Percy responds, is what I'm saying. But like his circumstances are.
See, this is the problem with the fact that I did start the second book, and I probably shouldn't have done that. But I will say, having now been a little bit into the second book, I do think that he is distinctly enough different from Percy. And I think that the thing that I sort of came to a conclusion with from reading the bit of the second book, and I won't say the specifics or anything, but like, he is much more thoughtful than Percy. The whole thing of like, basically Percy's entire like arc in House of Hades is all about like, I left this person over here and didn't think about them ever again. And that isn't Magnus. Even though Magnus and Percy are similar in that like, we are really loyal and care about our friends, Magnus, having gone through homelessness and dealt with that, is a very thoughtful person who like sees other people's pain in a very empathetic way, where I don't, in some ways I think Percy just is a teenager and Magnus has a lot more adult maturity when it comes to that stuff. But
I can buy that. I think I just it's just the fact of having finished Apollo. Yeah. It is a shame in some respects, because I think coming off of Kane Chronicles, this would have felt like, oh cool, another super cool thing. But even then, I don't know. I mean, just compared to Red Pyramid, I just don't. I didn't have the same emotional highs and lows here.
Yeah, I had more fun.
I had more fun too. I agree.
Yeah.
I think this was a lot of fun. I also I've watched a lot of like Norse mythology stuff in my life. Mostly like Vikings and oh my God, what's it called? Like something from some stuff on Netflix that is escaping me. But the point is that like I'm more familiar with, as an adult, with like this pantheon than I am, and this mythology, than I was with like Egypt. My 6th grade Egypt lessons. You know, like that was really a callback. And felt more new. So it was kind of like, for me, just being like, oh, I can just take these gods and the way they work and the Viking society / Norse society, meld it with our like local tourist attractions. And I'm back in Percy's head, sort of, even though he's like, he did honestly, even in this book, even in Sword of Summer, he felt more mature than Percy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that, like, yes, he did have to survive. He already had the value of life and
Yeah.
people. It's just that, like, also when Lightning Thief happened, Percy was 12.
Yeah.
So, and Magnus is 16.
Yeah.
So, like, it is an older sounding voice.
Yep.
But the thing is that by the end of Blood of Olympus, Percy was older.
Yep.
So it's like, that's where the distinction had a little bit of
Yeah.
trouble. But, you know, while I was reading it, I was like, I'm having a great time. If I needed to, like, pick up a book to take on a flight or like a beach read, I think I would rather, you know, just like pick up this book that I can just reread for fun.
Yeah.
Rather than Tower of Nero.
Yeah.
Are you sure you don't want to read Tower of Nero on your fun beach trip?
I think I'm good.
But I will also include in that Red Pyramid, as someone who has read Red Pyramid, I think 3 times. Once you know all the exposition, going through it again feels like a trudge. And I don't think that it's the same way here.
Yeah.
You know, like I read this book 1.5 times actually, because I had started it and then kind of forgotten about it, and then so I like restarted it and read the first half a second time. And yeah, I wasn't like, oh, I know how he blah blah blah. It's like it's very steadily, it moves from set piece to set piece, I think, very well. I think there's a few too many characters, but like I don't really know how I would have fixed that. There's a lot of good and there's a lot of weird things, and some of the weird things for me, I'm not sure if it's a mythology thing because I don't know Norse stuff that well, or whether it's a Rick thing. For instance, I'll just say this as a for instance. I don't understand why the god of summer is seen as the middle ground. It doesn't make sense to me because summer is the hottest time. And so why is that? That seems like an extreme. Seems like summer and winter are the extremes and spring or fall is the middle ground. And I'm like, well, I guess maybe this is just how it is in the mythology, so I can't blame Rick. But every time they brought that up over and over again, and I was just like, I don't get this.
I was in Denmark from the months of January through May.
Mm-hmm.
Gotta say, not much of a spring that I experienced in April and May. It was, that's like my only logic of it.
Yeah.
Of like, yeah, our spring a little bit further south is like more along the lines of what they get in the summer.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't their summer still their warmest time?
Presumably, yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I'm like, that seems like it's an extreme, not a middle ground. And I mean, I guess if you're saying it's the middle ground between literally like absolute zero and Deathfire, but like, I don't know. It just, that just kept coming, stuff like that came up a lot where I was like, what?
So Wikipedia says associated with sacral kingship, not kinship, fertility, peace, prosperity, and virility, with sunshine and fair weather, and with good harvest. So maybe it's less summer specific and more sort of like fair weather.
Yeah.
So why emphasize the importance of summer so much?
Well, I mean, for one thing, it's Summerbrander is the sword.
Yeah, but why have Frey be like, oh, yes, the god of summer?
I
think they just mean nice weather.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I'm leaning
towards. When I think of summer, I think of sweating bullets and not being happy.
Yeah, which based in Boston.
Yeah. Who could blame us?
Who could blame us? Yeah, more like Lord of like early April.
Oh, can I just say, when I picked up the book, I accidentally was reading it on Magnus's birthday. And it was like, January, what was it? January 13th?
Third, I thought it was.
Yeah, see, I've already forgotten. But the point is that I was reading it and it was like, the cold, awful, gray, terrible of Boston in early January. And I'm like, yes, can confirm, awful, terrible, gray.
Yeah. For sure.
I like the same day I was reading that first 25%, which is so Bostonian. I had to go downtown for a doctor's appointment. And so I was just like looking around like, yeah, there it is. There it is. Ooh, here it is. Ooh, there's that street and that street. It was very fun.
So I pulled a Clara, but instead of something very smart and like connected to literature and you know, history or greater society, I have a quote here that is more akin with what we're talking about. I guess no true Bostonian would trust a place that was sunny and pleasant all the time, but a gritty, perpetually cold and gloomy neighborhood, throw in a couple of Dunkin' Donuts locations, and I'm right at home.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Oh, man. I will say, for me, I'm like, can we go on like a tour of this book? Because I just feel very embarrassed about how little of this I do know.
We'll do a walkthrough.
Like a lot of places,
should.
I'm like, I obviously know the names of all these things, but I do not know my city well enough.
All right. So hometown hero aside,
Yep.
I think this was a noble effort, per usual, for a first book. And frankly, compared to the Trials of Apollo first book, this is like far beyond. So,
Absolutely.
And I would actually say it's better than Lost Hero, too, as far as starting off Heroes of Olympus, or at least comparable. But all right, disagree.
I think, again, in a lot of ways, that was like more dark and depressing. So
that book is really overly long. And I don't feel like this one is, even though actually they're pretty similar in length.
I was starting to a little bit with the length of this. I was like, why is this so long? We're just going back and forth between play. Like, again, it could have been edited down. I do sort of agree there are a lot of characters, but at the same time, I'm also like, but all of our main characters are necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think I do not love these characters yet the same way I've loved the characters in the. Well, all right, Hidden Oracle aside.
Yeah, and I think that is a lot about the amount of them, right? Because, you know, it's the second book of Kane Chronicles where they go, hey, here's a whole team of people. It's an ensemble. The first book really is about, you know, Katie.
Katie.
I want to say Sam and Katie. Carter and
Sadie.
Yes.
Sam and Katie.
Jeez. Whoa.
Gender swap
time.
They was very focused on them and then like whoever their parent person was at that moment. Right. And so I think that really let you deep into who they all were. Whereas here it's like you get a little sprinkling of Blitz. You get a little sprinkling of Hearthstone. You get like that's the thing is like I don't feel like I get enough of Hearthstone. I don't feel like I get enough Sam.
I agree.
So like and those are two people that I think have a lot of promise, but that don't necessarily go as far as I would like them to in the first book.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Do we want to get into the recap?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, so Magnus Chase is your typical homeless teen whose mother was murdered by mutant wolves.
Let's just stop and talk about homelessness.
Okay.
In the context of this book.
Yes.
Clara, what did you think about it? And also, you didn't know this was coming at all, right? So
I did not.
Were you surprised?
I knew going into this almost nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, I think it was well done. I think there's something really to be said about how he captures Magnus's choice in this, like that Magnus is choosing in some way to have the level of freedom he does and to not like be staying in a shelter or stay, you know, and talk about the downsides of like communal living situations, things like that. So I think there are some things that are handled really well. I think there are other things that feel a little bit less well handled where there's just like some humor but I don't know that it's like necessarily bad.
Yeah.
It just
I
don't know.
There's no Elvis in this book.
Yeah.
There's no moment for me. There's nothing in this book that like is glaringly like, oh, why? Oh no, it's more just like it's more subtle than that. And I obviously I'm not homeless, so I don't feel honestly that qualified to say whether he did a good job or not. But I think overall he didn't do a bad job. Like
right, I agree.
Yeah, like I think that he very purposely knows that this is an issue that doesn't get talked about, and I think that is worthwhile in and of itself.
We fear what we don't know a lot of the time, and people have associations with and are afraid of of homelessness and homeless people. And that's not like fair or good or anything. And but the thing is that like everyone's a person, and this is kind of Rick doing his bit of like, let's humanize the issue of you know, the unhoused. Like it's targeted at young readers. So like you can't really get into the specifics in the same way. He's not going to like talk about, he's not going to go into it the way John Oliver does, you know, like it's not going to be on that level of let's talk about the roots and what can be done and blah, blah, blah. Where he does is really just like, it's a community, there's choice there. This is like, even people who think they're helping don't necessarily like get how to help properly, or like with Magnus like having like truancy officers and like people trying to take him into like foster care or something like that, like things along those lines. You know, Rick touches on but doesn't really get why Magnus stays away from that either. But then you have like Blitz and Hearth like taking care of him. There's this like idea of, you know, community. So, you know, it's complicated.
I think it's a really hard topic to do well while staying sanitized, which is what this needs to be as a middle grade and not a young adult book. But I think he does a pretty good job of that. Like, there are a lot of little moments that I'm like, he didn't need to do that. Like the fact that that Magnus says, oh yeah, I've had alcohol. The fact that like he talks about being jumped by people, and I honestly I can't remember if it's this book or the second book, but he definitely talks about like how people of color have it worse than him. And I think that there's a lot of good. I just think that it definitely still felt sanitized at the end of the day.
I think that's exactly it. It's like there are just every once in a while there are little things that make it feel as though I'm being made to feel comfortable or something like that. Like there's some sort of, and it's not a specific thing. And I wish I should have gone through and found some examples, but it's almost more of a tone issue than anything else. And it's not, and I don't know. I don't want to sound too negative here, but there were just certain places where sort of like my criticism or critique, like hairs on the back of my neck were sort of like, hey, pay attention.
I think the things that I do like, I like him talking about like the way people look at him and how he just doesn't care what people think of him anymore. And he's like, oh yeah, I steal stuff. What, does that upset you? I don't care. Like, that's what I need to do. And I think there's definitely a lot there. And I like this. There's a few small moments throughout the book where he uses what he's learned on the street throughout the plot of the book. And those small moments I really like. Specifically, I like that I forget, there's one point when he's early on in Valhalla and he's like, oh yeah, I forgot. I'm in a new place. I don't know the rules yet. I need to take a step back and learn how this works. And I thought that was really smart. And honestly, for me, my biggest issue with the homelessness stuff is I wish it went further, and not even necessarily like darker. I wish that it was more directly his core story in this book. I don't care about his dead mom. Not to like we've done that, right? Yeah. Like I've seen we've had many books now by Rick about grieving and parents and all that stuff. The interesting thing with Magnus is that he was homeless, and I want that to be his main thing that he's dealing with. And I really wish that his time on the street had made him very closed off, and that he had trouble trusting people, and that this book was about him learning to trust again. Because to me, that would have been a story that fit more with his past. Well,
I do want to just push back a little bit on that particular thing, because I think one of the really cool things that Rick has done here is that's not necessarily what Magnus took from being homeless, but rather it was like, you find people who you can trust. You know, and you do, like, you need to be able to rely on people to help you, and I like that that's where he went with it. I like that there is a what is it called? It's not deficit thinking. It's all about like assets and strengths that Magnus has. And it's really focused on, oh, you think this is this thing that could only mean bad things for me? Well, it's also taught me X, Y, and Z, while also being very hard.
My flip side of that, and I get what you're saying for sure, is that that's what makes him feel like a bland character to me, is that he doesn't feel like he's someone who, like, I want him to have a character flaw.
I agree with you there. That he definitely needs.
Yeah. Especially
coming out
after
of
Apollo. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing where it's like, I'm not saying it doesn't have to be he can't trust people or whatever, but at least that would be something where like he's closed off. He like something to make him not just a good guy who likes people.
Yeah, I agree.
And I feel like that was a struggle for me.
Yeah. He doesn't, like, he's just like a nice kid who had bad things happen to them, and he took the peaceful route, out of it. Like, he's not that cynical. He's not that much of a loner. Like, again, we typically have these like ensemble books. This is one of them, and like Sam is the loner. Yep. Sam is the bitter one. Like,
and that's the other thing is I got a third of the way through the book and go, why is Sam not the main character?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. It's complicated. Because it's like, I do like Magnus. I like him as the narrator.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's just like a very good kid.
Yeah. And I will say I do like, and again, different from Percy, I like that. I overall like that he's not the fighter, right? I have some issues with that, and we'll get into that. But like, I like that he is about creating peace, and that he is disgusted by everything, all the fighting in Valhalla, because that felt different, and that felt like something I could sort of latch on to. But
yeah.
All right,
All right,
continue
so
the recap?
yes,
Yeah.
let's again, as usual, we like front load it with criticism, but and then I just have to say, but I liked reading it,
Yeah.
So one morning, Magnus's friend Blitz warns him that people are out to get him. Magnus's estranged family is looking for him after 2 years on the streets of Boston. His cousin, Annabeth Chase, seems legitimately worried about him.
I love all the Annabeth stuff in this. I thought it was really fun.
Yeah.
Yep.
Magnus breaks into his uncle Randolph's house, even though his mother had warned him Randolph was dangerous. Magnus sees his other friend Hearth through a window, signing for him to get out, but Randolph arrives and warns Magnus that people are coming to kill him, so they need to go.
Can we pause there?
Yes.
So A, we should talk about Hearth, but B, I really appreciated that this didn't go exactly where it seemed like it was going, where Randolph was his mentor and he would show him the ropes throughout everything. Like, that is just like, it felt so obvious that's what it's going to do. And the fact that he swerved away from that, I really appreciated. I really
like the parallel to Amos, with this sort of like, it's an uncle and he lives in this big house. And so, to not have that be the plot, even though obviously there is some sort of like Randolph Loki something happening.
Yeah. So while I agree that like, oh, this was a nice like misdirect, and Randolph is just like a means for Magnus to die and get the sword, but like, you're saying there are a lot of characters and there's a lot of locations. This is the downside to it not being like, Randolph isn't important in this context. Like, we don't actually like need him here. And it just felt like, I'm just saying, like, when in the big picture, we don't. Like, while I'm reading, I was like, oh, we're here and now we're gone. Like, oh, he has all these
I'd
like
actually
knickknacks.
sort of say the opposite of what you're saying.
Okay.
In the big picture, we need Randolph. Do we need him in this book? No.
Right. I mean, in the big picture of the series versus the big picture of the book. Like, this book specifically is almost 500 pages long, and there's a lot of characters.
I will say, though, that without him, so I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
But without that, I wouldn't have that epilogue, which is maybe my favorite part of the book.
Same.
Really?
Same.
Yeah, where the fact that he did an epilogue, so not Rick.
Yeah, that's
right. It was so weird.
Yeah, and it was cool. It was badass. And like, set up something that I'm intrigued to see more of. If the book didn't have the epilogue, I would not have ended it nearly as excited as I was with the epilogue.
Gotcha. I wouldn't say necessarily it's like my favorite part of the book, but
it's one of my
It was so
favorite.
cool. It was so cool and so weird. I was like, who am I reading?
Yeah.
What is this?
No epilogues. We don't do that. We don't break out of the character's POV once there's only one of them.
This is why I want him to go back and rewrite the end of Son of Neptune and add an epilogue where Nico gets captured in Tartarus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Oh, that would be good.
Yeah.
So do we want to talk about Blitz and Hearth here or wait until
Just
we
a
know a little
bit.
bit more about them?
I think they're both likable. I think this is definitely more Blitz's book than Hearthstone's book. I think that Hearthstone and his story is very much a like put a pin in this, we'll get back to it. And that's the problem I think with a lot of these characters is it's like we're setting this person up, we'll get into it next time, but it makes it you feel left wanting this time.
Yeah. And with only 3 books, it makes me so stressed.
Yeah.
Like I know I'm not gonna get the time I want with all of these characters.
Yeah.
So this is another not criticism. Let's think positive. This is a question I have. So Rick has said that the reason he didn't do more than a trilogy for King Chronicles is there's just like not enough known or documented about like Egyptian gods for him to like work with. Agree to disagree there. He could have found something, but whatever. He didn't think that he could stretch it and make it as good over a 5-book series.
Yeah.
I don't think the same can be said in terms of source material for Norse mythology. It is very well documented. It is very like there's a lot of it that survived. There's a lot of folklore.
Well, and I think it's also worth noting, I mean, we'll get to it when we talk about the ranking stuff, but the amount of gods that he put into this book where he didn't need to hit on that many in one book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it comes down to him being tired. And I don't blame him.
He had interest and he was writing Apollo at like the same time. So in that sense, I'm like, I get it. You're only human, maybe. But
he's a demigod for sure. Oh, Rick.
But the point is that I'm just like, it's this thing of it feels certain things feeling rushed, certain things not being like as fleshed out. It's a little weird.
I think it's more likely that we will get another book in the Magnus Chase universe than we will Kane Chronicles. I think that Kane Chronicles is very intensely about the Kanes. There's enough of a world here and an ensemble that I would not be shocked if we got a Sam book or something like that. And especially because I know that the short story book that he does for Magnus Chase, I believe takes place after the trilogy and is 9 stories from 9 different people's perspectives, none of them Magnus.
Oh my God.
Interesting.
So
he's crazy.
So that alone, I mean, I obviously haven't read them yet, but that implies to me, he has definitely more ideas and more characters he wants to delve into.
So, I mean, more to come with Hearth and Blitz as they like do stuff.
Yep.
But I do agree it is mostly Blitz's book.
Yeah. Do we want to hit on Hearthstone and ASL and all that stuff? Or do we want to just get to it later?
No, let's talk about it now because, he is signing to get Magnus's attention. I thought that was really, like, again, really cool, really interesting. And like, it is an unfortunate... Why do I go this direction? It's just unfortunate that it has to be like, oh, he's like broken because his he feels broken in his heart because his family rejects him for him being deaf. So it's like, that's, it's just a little trauma miney in a way that at least for this book doesn't feel like it fits.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it is balanced by the fact that he's already found his new family, right? Like Rick goes to the well of abusive parents quite a bit. I see where you're coming from, but I also think that like he could have made a total side character be the deaf character. I think the fact that he made him such a major character, a likable character, an elf with magic,
a funny
powerful
character.
Yeah.
He's power.
Yeah.
He's like the only one who can do it, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
and like his sarcasm. Even
Yeah.
Magnus being like, people don't give Hearth enough credit for like what he's capable of because he signs, and it's
And you know what I really appreciate is that he also doesn't shy away from the fact that it's hard. Like, it's a lot of things, especially fantasy things, will be like, he's deaf, but it doesn't matter because magic fixes it and he hears in some different way, or like they just want to be like really, really positive and be like, being deaf doesn't hold you back at all. And I appreciate that there's times where someone shouts and he doesn't hear it, and that can be a problem.
Yeah.
Having again, it's not like it's totally, a huge thing, but it's just a sort of subtle things where there are times where, even though he's this great character, he's very capable, he still has trouble and has to work through that. And I think that to me is just so much more real than a lot of other things do.
Yeah. Hearth, he's my favorite character in the series so far. He has, I just want to call it like just a little sprinkle of like Nico energy, where he's this sort of like sarcastic, funny boy who's capable of really cool magic stuff. And I really like him as a character, and I love the whole like elves don't have magic anymore, like it's this like it's basically like but like Hearth goes to the Ren Fair. Like
I did think that
really
was good. I'll also say, as far as the trauma aspect of it, I think that once you see more of the elves, you probably will have less of an issue with it than you do right now.
But this is the nature of like, you're mashing it in because you want to introduce all the characters. And I guess, it happens later, but it's really like where Magnus is like, I felt the dark energy inside of him and this pit of despair. And it's like, we're not really actually mining this. And Magnus doesn't go to Alfheim. Sam goes with Hearth. And so it's like one of those, like, we're hearing a lot about it. We're not actually like,
and Sam is even the one who tells him the bit of backstory we get.
And
so I agree with that. I don't think we needed to touch on his backstory at all in this book, and I think it would have been better. But
I like him as a character, and I do appreciate the fact that the magic isn't like, and with the magic I can hear, like, no, that's not what this is about. So that's important. Okay, so during an accurate portrayal of driving through downtown Boston, Randolph tells Magnus that the Norse gods are real and Magnus is the son of one. He needs Magnus to retrieve a sword that had been lost at sea hundreds of years ago by Viking explorers. They arrive at the Longfellow Bridge, and Magnus calls the sword through the frozen over Charles River. Yes.
One thing I wanted to hit on is I think it's worth noting, especially considering stuff we said during the Percy Jackson stuff. I was very happy how little he like aggrandized the Vikings and their history. He didn't go on and on about how they were the greatest at this and that, and they did this thing that nobody else did, and without them we wouldn't have culture and blah blah. He just said facts basically, and didn't imbue an opinion.
I mean, it would have been wild for him to do that with the Vikings, given this is one particular pagan subculture that has such a problem with white supremacy. Still, I mean, like, when you go, here's a little fun fact about me is I love the Ren Fair. And when you go to the Ren Fair and you are looking at stuff that has like Norse like runes and stuff like that, there will be specific things about like, you see that we are using this version of this rune because the other one has really close ties to white supremacy and we don't believe that, there have to be disclaimers. It's been so like, it's so I think it's really he did he did a good job staying away from that, because that would have definitely been a danger here.
Yeah.
And so far there's no like, yes, the Vikings came and they were the real they're the ones who discovered like Massachusetts named for native.
The one thing I thought was weird was the only mention of Native Americans in this book is Halfborn saying, "Oh yeah, I love those guys. They were vicious fighters."
Yeah.
That's weird. That's weird.
Yeah, it was weird. I agree.
Yep.
Not like, obviously not the worst ever, but it definitely gave me pause.
Yeah. But yeah, at least there wasn't any like, and the Vikings came and they did what Vikings do, and isn't it glorious?
Yeah.
It's like, well, they probably didn't, but even fictionally. Yeah. So a series of explosions rock the area, and fire giant Surt appears. He's come to kill Magnus and take the sword.
Certainly.
Ah, good one.
Wow.
Hearth and Blitz run in with toy weapons to help.
This is one of the worst parts of the book.
This makes no sense to me, and it made me so confused about Hearth and Blitz and like everything that happened afterwards. Like,
it doesn't jive at all.
It makes no sense. Yeah. So they get Randolph off of the bridge and help a few other people while Magnus fights Surt himself. They fall off the bridge together and Magnus dies. I have to say, this was shocking to me. Like, oh, Magnus is dead, not just like...
And also isn't going to come back. That I think is very surprising too.
Yeah. He's like a new kind of being. He's not just like an alive demigod. Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah. He's not even like Hazel. Yeah. Like Hazel gets to come back to life. Yeah. Like, no, Magnus is like a different species.
Yeah.
So Magnus wakes up completely uninjured outside of the Hotel Valhalla. The hotel manager explains how Magnus is an
Inherye.
Yeah.
The Inherye is the plural, Inheryar is the singular.
Yeah, I meant to have the book with me. It has like a pronunciation guide in the back, and I forgot.
Good luck.
Thanks. Prepared as always. So he's a warrior of Odin now, chosen to fight in Ragnarok. Magnus meets Samira Sam Alabas, the Valkyrie who brought him to Valhalla after he died. Sam isn't liked or trusted by the other Valkyries because she is a daughter of Loki.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Especially since like once it's revealed that we've like met Loki and he's just like a townie in a Red Sox jersey too. It's just like a very interesting, like, wait, what? Her? Him? How?
I could totally picture him in that Red Sox. Like, I know that man. I've met him. I've interacted with him.
Very handsome, but devilish gleam in his eye, and he's going to make trouble if the Red Sox lose. Or win, frankly. At dinner, Magnus is revealed to be the son of Frey, the god of summer. Gunilla, the captain of the Valkyries, manipulates video footage to make Magnus look like an ineffectual failure. The Norns appear and give a prophecy about Magnus. Because there's a line about him being wrongly chosen and due to prejudice against Sam as a daughter of Loki, she is dismissed from the Valkyrie.
So I think this is also a highlight of the book. I think I definitely felt for Sam during this. Well, as far as, we talked about it not necessarily having quite the heart as much necessarily as some of the other ones, but I think this is a very strong moment and gets you connected to her pretty quickly.
Yeah. I'm like so angry that the video is manipulated against Magnus and her, and I was like, how dare you?
Honestly, at this point in the book, I was all in. I was all in, and Dan, I think maybe both you and Olga were like ahead of me or something. And so I was like, I'm so excited about this. And you're both sort of like, nah. Now I feel like it's
that doesn't sound like us at all.
No, I really like Sam. I wish we got more of Sam. This is definitely the part where I was like, why isn't she the main character? Daughter of Loki? That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Especially daughter of Loki, who is a Valkyrie. And her upbringing and everything being what it is. I just think there's a lot of interesting stuff there. They don't get that much into her religion in this book, which they do in the second one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And
okay.
I think it's phenomenal in the second one from what I've read so far. So I just, there's a lot of things that I'm like, they take it to the next step in the next book. But I do feel like it's a little lacking in this one.
I mean, it seems here they're emphasizing more like the cultural / also like her being caught between two cultures and that emphasis. And that to me is a logical transition to then discussing religion, you know, once you've established the world. So
I think she and Lavinia the only two, or maybe Nico as well. Did they mention Nico being raised Catholic? 'Cause I know like Lavinia.
Yeah.
I know they talk about like him being raised in the 40s.
Yeah.
But
in Italy.
I don't remember whether they talked about religion.
They might have said he was Catholic. I know there is another, I think maybe like a daughter of Demeter or something who is also supposed to be Jewish, but obviously she's not like an important character. Yeah. So those are and then obviously Hazel went to a school with nuns, but that wasn't religious. So
I'm really interested because it was one of my like critiques of whichever it was. God,
Tyrant's Tomb.
Yes, Tyrant's Tomb with Lavinia's religion being sort of like discussed but not actually discussed, and so I'm really, really excited for this next book with Sam.
Well, and that's what's interesting. Where my criticism with that was you're discussing her religion and her cultural background, and neither of them actually matter.
Yeah.
So it's like, but here
it matters.
It matters.
Yeah.
Sam's cultural background matters, and her family structure matters.
Yeah, and you can tell that, like, even though it's not like gone into in detail here, it feels important to her in a way that, for whatever reason, at least when I was reading it, it didn't so much with Lavinia.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciate that.
And I think he balances, we talked about the trauma stuff with Hearthstone. With Sam, he doesn't shy away from the fact that, those kids bullied me in middle school, but I protected them anyway. And so like that is a way of like mentioning that she was mistreated, but turning it around so it's an empowering moment. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't control how people process their trauma, and some people are, have a different type of resilience to it. And
no, I'm just saying, as far as him writing it and mentioning it, but not making it like all about that.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I think Sam's cool.
She's a great character.
Yes. We like Sam here.
Oh, and as far as the religion stuff goes, I mean, as weird as it seems, Magnus is an atheist.
Yeah.
And that continues.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, but
that's great.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that Rick is increasingly not shying away from that. And I mean, Daughter of the Deep also has some religion.
Not quite as good.
I love that.
Yeah,
but he doesn't have as much time in one book. But I think it's really, really great.
Yeah.
Yes. So the next day, Magnus meets his homemates, Thomas Jefferson Jr., Mallory Keene, Halfborn Gunderson, and X the Half-Troll. They go to the daily training battlegrounds where they fight against other and Harriar in preparation for the Battle of Ragnarok. Magnus has the ability to heal himself quickly, heal others, and expel weapons from people's hands. He's eventually killed in the battle, but he's done some good, and he comes back.
All right, so let's talk about this. I was definitely taken aback by this scene.
Holy moly! Holy what? What in the
It's very
bloodbath?
Interesting because it's so violent, but it's also like these are all of these things we've seen the other characters in the other books do. They just didn't mention that there was literal blood they were going through.
Yeah. I was so gleeful during this. I was a kid in a candy store. This is so up my alley because this is like so in keeping with the feeling of the mythology.
Yeah.
I adored this.
Yeah.
I love everything. This everything at the Hotel Valhalla was really, really a high point for me.
Yeah. And I thought that it was really well done and very much felt like this is something we're doing because we're doing Vikings. As we wouldn't have done this in the other ones, but Vikings call for this. And I think that was cool. I think that making the Hallmates like likable characters, but also still seeing them through Magnus's eyes where he's like, these people are really, really weird and violent, and I don't know how I am handling this.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm not handling this.
and like, is this okay? Like, I understand they need to prepare, but like, this still seems like a bit much. Like, I thought all of that was really well done.
There's some really good humor here, even though it's juxtaposed against like explicit violence.
Yeah.
I mean, like TJ being like, let's take the hill. And Mallory's like, he's obsessed with taking hills. But they go and they take the hill. Like, you know, it's just one of those things where I'm like, ha ha, this is great. Oh my God, is this book? But here's the thing. The book didn't meet this level of violence like ever again.
I'd say Gunilla. Gunilla and her
dying,
two people.
it really wasn't
as
no, it was
well,
not.
You know what?
This.
So many people, I would actually say there was a lot more violent death of humanoid monsters to like the giants. I don't know. There's something different about killing like women who are going to be going out on a date.
And also who don't disappear into dust.
Yeah, don't disappear into dust. Yeah. Definitely way more violent.
And also like Halfborn Gunderson at the end is also like having blood and gush and all these things sprouting out of him too. I think
Great
you're a
stuff.
little underplaying the final battle.
You're right. It's just the scale of this one. And I mean, because Magnus wasn't like himself, you know, slashing blood out of people, it makes it a little
it's an interesting combination where you have such a violent culture and tone, but then you still have your main character be like the non-violent one.
It's just that like in Trials of Apollo though, like when people die, it does have some brutal imagery. Like you have like images of like people's bodies being very like bashed up and you know.
You're right. Definitely it got more violent in the back half of Trials of Apollo, also with the hands being cut off and all that.
Oh yeah.
You know what it is though, is there's something gleeful in this violence. Like you can tell other people are taking joy. Like and with the Hotel Valhalla stuff, there's no consequence.
Yeah.
And later on there are obviously, but the Apollo violence is so intimate and horrifying that even though it's precisely because there aren't blood and guts flying all over the place that it's like so awful.
I mean I think that the stuff at Valhalla is also potentially commentary, whether it's about like violent video games or violent movies or whatever, just the callousness of, this doesn't have consequences, so it doesn't matter. Well, you're still decapitating someone, so I don't know. Maybe you should think about that. Like, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
in a vision, Magnus sees Loki warning him about choices affecting destiny, and he sees Surt reforming.
All right. I'm actually going to pause this here and say that we should start part 2.
I agree.
Okay.
Yes.
So thank you guys for listening to part 1. We'll be back next week with part 2, and then we will be getting into Hammer of Thor after that. If you want to send us feedback that we can talk about during Hammer of Thor, you can email us at ourpodcastfeedback@gmail.com. Leave comments on our YouTube video, or leave us a review. That would be great too. We actually have someone who gave us a review that I wrote down, and they have a really weird name.
I'm scrolling as fast as I can. Thanks to EasyGGDCBBXSDV from the UK. My favorite. Thank you so much, and we will be back next week. May the gods be ever in your favor. Bye-bye.
Bye.